So hello, so I've been introduced. I think I'm probably the least interesting person on this panel. I'm genuinely really excited for this. I've known some of you for a very long time. And we just had a conversation just now, and some of the stories we're going to hear now I think are honestly really inspiring, really exciting. So yeah, I think without further ado, I'd quite like you to introduce yourselves, if you're happy, just to explain to people who you are and how you come to be here.
Okay, is this on? Oh, yeah. Hi, everyone. I'm Bev, and I have been involved in animal rights since 1981, when I joined. I found an animal rights stall in Sheffield run by National Anti-Vivisection Society. I think we're all here because we all got caught at least once and did time, and I was arrested. First time I had ever been arrested at Unilever Laboratories, which was one of the League raids in 1984, and served 10 months and 2 days in Holloway and Cookham. That's me.
Hi, I'm Mel Arnold, and I got involved in animal rights from quite a young age, from about 13, as an avid punk music listener. Back then we had CDs with newsletters in them, and loads of vivisection images, which are quite traumatising, but also very galvanising in terms of the rest of the information, where punk music information would give you addresses of national animal rights organisations and sometimes laboratory information as well, which certainly put me on a trajectory, shall we say, which I decided very early on I was always going to be staying on. And run through to today, I was constantly doing animal rights things from the age of 13, really. And then in the early 90s, I was arrested for an arson on a slaughterhouse, and I think about 9 lorries, can't really remember. And I'd done 3.5 years for that. A year after that, I was imprisoned again for violent disorder at Hillgrove Farm. I don't know why I'm laughing. Okay, it was a really good demo. It was worth the 10 months. And that's me.
Hi, my name's Angie. Like both Bev and Mel, I've been involved in animal rights and a vegan for a long, long time, since I was 15. I got involved in Animal Liberation Front in 1981. How I sort of got involved was It just was a natural progression of working with animals, being involved in animal welfare, but also being involved in lots of other movements at the time. Growing up, sort of where I did, it was a really good, powerful political time, and also very much invested in the punk scene, where a lot of sort of politics, for want of a better word, was shared, and a lot of information was shared. And I think people of our time all sort of maybe became animal rights activists individually before we really met other people. Didn't really know there was like-minded people until we met them, through being punk gigs, also being introduced to hunt sabbing. That's how I got involved and met people. Been involved for a long time, arrested for lots of things but not necessarily charged, and was eventually arrested again for conspiracy to cause criminal damage, which was meat trucks, and I was also arrested for a fray for smashing up a huntsman's house after he killed a young hunt sab. And yeah, I think that's basically it. Yeah.
Yeah, honestly, like some of the things I think we've heard and we're going to hear, like all of these people have really inspired my journey. I don't think any of you realise quite the impact you've had on me personally, and I hope we can inspire a lot more people. But something you just alluded to there, Angie, was the movement back then, the idea of people just kind of taking action because they wanted to, and often people didn't necessarily know other people when they started, which is something that maybe we've lost a bit. I was just wondering if each of you, maybe starting with you, Angie, can describe what the energy was like, what the movement was like when you joined it.
Yeah, it was very full of energy. There was certainly a lot going on. Individually, I think we were all doing things without realising our then peers were doing the same thing. Yeah, I don't really know.
Mel, do you have anything?
What's the question, sorry?
Just what the energy was like in the movement, what the movement itself was like.
The movement was intense. It was extremely full on. It was, for me personally, which I'm sure was reflected in a lot of other people, I held down 2 jobs. I was in security and I was also nursing. So full-time job, weekend job. I was training in martial arts 3 times a week to keep myself fit. I was doing outreach on street stalls. I was doing rooftop protests against boots, and in my free time, I was doing lots of surveillance up and down the country, and also involved in ALF activity at the same time. And I managed to do all that in a week, and it was full on. It was sleeping for 2 hours, if that, getting up and doing the same thing. Being self-sufficient with my job, so I didn't have to ask anyone for money. No one knew what I was up to. And just keeping it on a loop. And eventually you do meet up with other people and can create bigger actions involving perhaps more animals, larger animals. Most things you can do on your own, and I was doing that on my own for a very long time until I started meeting and working with other people. So for me, it was very, very intense. And retrospectively, when I was speaking to other people that were also doing this, it was very similar for them as well. So we had no leaders. There was no one suggesting what we might do. There was no organisation. We just decided as individuals, and then with other groups of smaller people, to take part in an action, to decide for ourselves what we thought should be doing, what we should be doing, going out and doing that. We didn't have internet. We had maps. We had common sense, and we had our legs. And we'd sit all night sometimes just watching a place to decide if it was worth doing or not. And if it wasn't, it was aborted. If it was, we just got people together and done it. We just decided for ourselves. It was autonomous. We'd done that for ourselves with no training whatsoever. There was no peers instructing us on how to do anything. Most things are common sense. And so for me, it's an extremely intense decade. And I think that represents the movement there, because it was being done by everyone else as well. So it's actions being done every night sometimes. Some people even passing each other in country lanes, around certain institutions. And it was just very, very full on.
I think I'd sum it up by saying that we were driven by a sense of moral indignation. So once I decided, animal rights had no place in the world while I was in it as well, that I needed to do something about it. So from that stand, the National Anti-Vivisection stand that I came to in Fargate, I went vegetarian that day. I went vegan 5 days later. You can imagine what my body made of that. Went out on my first SAB. The next minute, I'm the getaway driver for a raid, and the next minute, I've got 25 rabbits in my back garden, and that's kind of how it was. And I think you just, I'd come from quite a middle class, quite law-abiding background, so I didn't break the law. It was I was kind of very, but all of a sudden, you just have this switch that just says, actually, if the law's not right, I have no compunction but to break it. I didn't have any problem with that. And I just remember that whole thing of kind of just going out and wreaking havoc and then just running away laughing. But I think the thing we need to remember is, we used to call us the famous 5-go pillaging, because that's what it felt like. But there was no DNA. there was no CCTV, and we could just be, we just literally, we don't like that, that's got to go. We don't like that, that's got to go. And I think, and I've shared this with Tom, in 1985, the favourite headline ever was that the Animal Liberation Front are responsible for more collateral damage, financial damage, in the UK mainland than the IRA. And I thought, that is achieving something. And that were groups like us just kind of running around saying, that's not happening, and we're not having that, and we're not tolerating that. So it was an amazing time.
Okay, so I think the clue's in the title of this talk, that all of you have been to prison. I think some people here, it might be surprising to know that our movement has had hundreds of prisoners over the years. And yeah, I would just kind of like to hear each of your stories of how you ended up getting caught, what you got caught for, how you ended up in prison, and maybe a little bit about what your stay was like. Maybe Mel, do you want to start? You don't have to.
Okay, yeah, so I alluded to it earlier. So I took part in an arson attack against a slaughterhouse. And I was able to gain access to that slaughterhouse before deciding I would attempt to burn it down. And having gone in it and walked up the drover's ramp, because there's just two of us, that's all it takes. Walking up the drover's ramp, which is where the animals would be going, and witnessing the animal in front being slaughtered and hung up, I silently at midnight walked that path that those animals would be walking, and it was hideous. It was absolutely hideous, and I knew I would have to return and do something. So 2 weeks later I did. So that happened. So I was caught. It was in Gloucester, and I lived in Northampton at the time, so there was no real reason for the police to come to my door, other than the fact that the volunteer that was with me went the next day to the sanctuary that he worked at, and the police, not really knowing where to go or where to look, decided to go to an animal sanctuary first, just in case. And I think he had something in his van that they looked at. So the police arrested him and 2 other sanctuary workers that had no idea that anything had even taken place. So because of that, my co-defendant spoke to the police and implicated himself in the action in order to have the other 2 people released, which happened. They then obviously raided his house, and his neighbours said that a young woman had come to stay. This was her vehicle, and this is when she left. So I think it was just my vehicle, using my vehicle to actually drive down there, even though the vehicle wasn't used in the action. So they came crashing into my door and just hauled me off. So I was on remand for, I think, 16 months. Was told I'd receive 10 years. So I'm like, okay. Then I'll do a degree, I can do 2 degrees. So in my mind, I was, what can I get out of this? Because they are not going to beat me down. As far as I was concerned, I'd already decided that what my boundaries were in terms of what I was prepared to do, and therefore I had to accept any consequences that came. So I could just drop that. I could just drop the fact that, I've decided this is my choice, I'm not a victim of this, so whatever happens, happens. So 10 years, 2 degrees, I can get out, I can do this, I can do that. And in the meantime, I'd done an awful lot of research while I was waiting for trial. And then, as it turns out, I only got 3.5 years, so great. So I was out in 6 after that, and then I was able to rejoin the movement, rejoin the Hillgrove campaign. Well, not rejoin, it started while I was in, and it was amazing to be able to come out and see such amazing campaigns where so many people all over the country united against one breeder after another and was actually closing these places down. It was incredible. So that obviously led to my second imprisonment. So on that occasion, it was a national demonstration, and there were so many people, That farmhouse got the... I was going to swear then. That farmhouse was got the shit bricked out of the roof. And it was amazing. And I was arrested because there was an undercover copper, of course, milling around, pretending to be a protester who was filming my every move. So, unfortunately, I was arrested for that and served 10 months. Yeah.
You answered the question. But I will just say, for people who don't know, Hillgrove Cat Farm was a breeder of cats for animal testing they were closed down in the mid-90s. You can read all about it in my book, Your Neighbour Kills Puppies. Shameless plug. Angie, the question was, can you tell us a little bit about how you ended up in prison, and maybe if you like a little bit about what it was like for you in prison as an activist, as a vegan?
So I did end up in prison. I was, at the time, I do find it difficult talking, so bear with me. So at the time, I'd been arrested for various actions and was on bail. Some of the actions, for example, there was a raid at Interfauna where 82 beagles and 34 rabbits were liberated by the ALF. I was on bail for that. That is MBR Acres, where Camp Beagle are. So they're having a demo today, so big up Camp Beagle today. I was also bailed for liberation of 7 mongrel dogs that were being used for transplant experiments and immunosuppressant drugs. We were, at the time, we were involved in ALF, but we were trying lots of different things. So we were doing big inspections on property to get information as well. And we were doing inspection of a place, Laundry Farm, which is run by Roy Khan, who was a transplant pioneer. And we'd had a whistleblower that had got information that they were using crossbreed animals, and Scientific Act, animals used in experiments have to be purpose-bred, and at the time those animals were beagles and greyhounds. We were told that there was crossbreed dogs there. So we wanted to get evidence. We all piled in to get photographic evidence and documents, and the doors of the kennels were open and there was dogs inside. And yes, they were collie crosses, little puppies. So they were taken. The police came. I ended up with a van full of dogs and was chased down the motorway and stopped and arrested. So that was one of my bail. I was also on bail for a fur farm and was eventually arrested for conspiracy to cause criminal damage, which was literally arson on some cattle trucks, as well as we were charged with a fray. A young hunt sab who was only 18, Mike Hill, was killed out hunt sabbing, was run over by a huntsman called Alan Summersgill. He didn't even stop, so and died on the road. A whole group of us got our act together and went to the house and basically smashed his house up. So we were all charged with riot and then bailed away. I'd been remanded for 6 weeks in Holloway. That was my first prison experience. Luckily, I had a co-defendant and it was fine. Prison was fine. There was a big support in the movement. On remand, you have visits every day, and I was with a fellow activist. I then decided I was granted bail, having to report to the police station, still getting arrested for various other actions, and eventually our trial for the riot happened. So many activists that I knew and were dear to me were in prison for this act. So rather than going to trial, I decided not to recognise the court, and I went on the run. I didn't want to. yeah, I thought I'd just get picked up in a couple of days, but I wanted to make a stand that I don't recognise the courts. They're not in our favour, that there's no rights for animals in this country. So that was what I decided. 2 years later, I was eventually arrested with a fellow activist at the time, and ended up serving 4 years in prison, which by going on the run, believe it or not, I got less time than my co-defendants, and also a lot of charges were dropped against me. Ironically, all the animal charges were dropped. We really wanted to make a big court case of crossbreed dogs being used at this laboratory, and that basically didn't happen. And yeah, I'd like to know that was why it didn't happen. But experiences in prison, at the time I was moved around to a lot. I was arrested down south, so I was initially in Holloway. It doesn't exist anymore. One of the oldest, you were in Holloway, weren't you? The oldest prisons, very cold, but it was absolutely fine. I was then moved up north for a trial, which then didn't happen. Moved back down south for a trial that then didn't happen, and then but with all that time, that was what they did to activists a lot, where we were remanded for a long time. So they were trying to sort of like, we didn't have support network, we were away from our families, things like that, but that just didn't happen. Our movement rallied round, and we were the most supported people in prison. 50 cards a day, things like that, visitors all the time. And also while I was in prison, we wanted to talk, the VPSG, Vegan Prisoner Support, was set up by a dear friend of mine, wanted to support me and then my partner to make sure we got decent vegan food in prison, so to change the prison system so that we were looked after. So I didn't have an issue with prison. I found that I used prison to my advantage, getting fit, learning new skills. My biggest thing was I've always been involved with rescues, with sanctuaries, and when you have a lot of animals living with you. My biggest hardship was leaving my animals behind, but they didn't suffer. They had amazing people looking after them. So the only sadness of going into prison for me was leaving my animals behind, but it certainly wasn't an issue. I do think women's prisons are a lot easier, or whether it's how women cope in prison and use the system, which is I certainly used the system rather than fighting it just to get anything that I needed inside. But yeah, I didn't find it a hardship, and we were totally supported, and basically by the ALF supporters group as well. There would be a magazine that went out with all prisoners' addresses, so you just get random people writing to you, which was just amazing. The support was amazing. Yeah, so it wasn't a hardship for me personally.
Well, I feel like I had a bed and breakfast because I only got a 2-year prison sentence, so pretty much a lightweight compared to my compadres here. So I was involved in the league raids, which were started by the Northern Animal Liberation League, which was against ICI, which was brilliant. And then we went on, and there was Unilever, which was run by Eel, Eastern, and then Seal. And so the league raids, the idea were that you get a large number of people together, most of who didn't know where they were going, which has got very dubious connotations now. I did know where I was going. And you raid and you try and get information out. So I was involved in raiding Unilever, and was having a great time. I was having a really great time. I was getting in through windows, and I didn't hear the siren that said get out because I was having such a great time. And so finally we were running round, and I got nicked. So I knew I was going to go to prison, but we were on bail for about nearly 2 years, I think it was. We finally got convicted in 86. And those 2 years, apart from later with Shack and Hillgrove, were probably the best years of my life, because they always say, don't they, if you've got nothing to lose. So I thought, well, I'm going to prison soon anyway. I might as well go nuts, which I absolutely did. And just kind of found it quite liberating, really. So I was convicted, in 1986, in February 86. I was in Holloway. And that was really interesting, because I was 25, I think. But I was used to being really busy and being in charge. And it took me a while to get used to the fact that prison officers were in charge. I didn't quite get that whole thing. And so I was trying to organize things and trying to do education. And in the end, prison officers had come to my hatch and say, do you think we should have association? So I'm thinking about, maybe I need to kind of cool it down a bit here and remember actually that I am a prisoner. But we did all sorts, we try and stop bullying and trying to get everyone looking after each other, which was really lovely. And then, and I can say his name because he got convicted, Paul Gravitt, who now does Spy Cops, sprayed the walls of Holloway with huge letters that said, free the Unilever 4, because the first 4 of us were in. Jail the vivisectors, not the freedom fighters, right? Holloway were apoplectic that this had happened. I just thought it was the best thing ever. But they were threatening to move us. I then moved to, and just one little kind of mini story. My partner then, who was in the 3rd trial, so I was already in Holloway when he was convicted. And Holloway was like a big quadrangle. And I was waiting. I knew he was in court. I didn't know whether or not he'd been found guilty. And apparently, the women on his trial shouted across to the women in the other window saying, can you tell Bev that Carl loves her? And he got convicted. And then right across the quadrangle, these big voices were shouting, Bev, Carl loves you, and he got convicted. Which I just thought, when you're thinking about love stories, it was quite a nice one, really. I think like Angie or like Mel, you make the most of it. You just crack on, really. I moved to Cookham Wood, where there were only 3 northerners, me, the governor, and Myra Hindley, which I thought was kind of a bit of I thought I'm in dubious thing here. But just one very funny story, because I do think, and what I don't want to do is say to everyone, oh, it's great, it's like a girls' club, let's all get nicked, because it's really, the best thing you can do is not get nicked, and the best thing you can do is not get caught. But I'll tell you a really odd story, which is, there was a vicar in Cookham Wood who took a shine to me, which is very sinister, isn't it? But he would call me out, and he would have soya milk and vegan biscuits, which in those days was quite a thing. And I couldn't quite understand why I kept getting called out. And then he ripped his dog collar off in a room that I was in. Anyway, I shot out. I moved really fast after that. So, so there are really interesting, we carry on living. I think that's the most important thing. We carry on living. So, I'm going to shut up because we've got 5 minutes.
Yeah, this has gone way quicker. I wish we had hours on this, honestly. Just quickly then, maybe Bev, okay, maybe not Bev. No, I'm just trying to think what is the best question here to get across what we want to do. But I suppose just quick stories from each of you, if we have time, of how activists historically have adapted to stay ahead of the repression we faced.
I think it's a really important point. And what you've got to do is you've always got to learn. You've got to look at because the state will always be adapting to challenge you. And you need to understand that, and you need to move towards it. So, for example, when we were doing ALF our rule was you're never on the road after 11 o'clock at night, and you're never on the road at 6 o'clock in the morning. So we would walk for miles. We would walk all night and then sleep, because that was the rule. Then when they brought in helicopters with heat things, you have a route where you can get under tunnels and things like that. And if you look at things like Shack and where we had, looked at investors and things like that, I would say to people is, look at how the state is adapting to stop you doing what you want to do, and find a way around it. The animal rights movement, if nothing else, are a group of problem solvers. We're the best at it.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think it's difficult, isn't it? Because they've got the upper hand in terms of the finance and the technology. And of course, we're moving now ever more towards a more digital state. You've got facial recognition everywhere now. So I think, for me, I think people should be just thinking outside of the box and having a radical shake-up as to just more creative ways of achieving our aims. It depends on what you're doing, of course. For decades, we would just be wearing balaclavas, turning up at night and raiding places. And then with the Animal Rising raid, where we've got nothing to hide, why should we wear balaclavas? You guys should be on the run, not us. And that kind of people power, boots on the ground, just walking in like you own the place, and just not accepting there's a security guard there who can do anything about that, or the police. It's people power, people numbers. So that was amazing. It was just a slight switch of the old kind of raids that had been happening for decades. And I think things like that are really important, like at Ridgeland, is it Ridgeland? As well. And the way Wayne was just walking through with his black coat and his paper sheaf under his arm. He was chasing the employee there. The employee turned around in his tractor and went off. So it's just switching things up. It's doing the unexpected. They expect us to behave a certain way. We have to change that and be really adaptable. And that's going to look different for each particular business that you're focusing on, you're targeting. But we need to be thinking more creatively. We need people, I think, young people that are new into the movement, to be ultra sleeper cell. Not be wearing T-shirts, attending demos. They should be getting jobs in places. You can take a whole place out just with knowing the tech and being on the inside. Hacking. These things that do not promote visibility. Dropping any kind of ego, wanting to be seen doing this and that. We're in it for the long haul. So I think people should be thinking in different ways of how they can actually contribute to furthering animal rights in the long term by playing clever, using your strengths, training in certain areas where these businesses need people to be coming in and doing that job. And from an inside perspective, not just whistleblowing, this shit is happening, but doing destruction from the inside.
Just believing in what you're doing, having that strong conviction. One story, an early action that I was really involved in, just really quickly, there's a saying, by whatever means necessary, and the last fur farm in this country, last Arctic fox farm, we shut down. We literally threw everything at it. This fox farm was raided by the ALF and foxes were liberated. There was mass inspections. It was on the news. There was photographs. There was demos. There was camps there. I went undercover into Hudson Bay as a fashion student to get evidence where they were selling their furs. We lobbied the council because there was a footpath. They were given a license and there was a public footpath around the farm. And also knowing your target, watching and researching. And the final straw was we were watching, we knew they'd gone away. So I went in dressed up as a young woman then, the person looking after the farm. We knew there was a lot of foxes that had escaped and got loose. I asked if I could have a fox, and they said yeah. And there's all amazing stories in our life, but literally this fox ran into my arms. And I took him away, and we called him Minty, and he went straight to the vets, and Minty was very ill and had leptospirosis, which Weil's disease in people, which is, you know, a bad disease. And through that, by trying everything, that farm didn't get its license by the council because it was a threat to human life. Hudson Bay stopped using their fur because we exposed them as well. And there was 17 foxes left, so the ALF went in and took those last 17. That farm then became an organic veg farm. So full story, sort of it was like everything was done, sort of direct action, politicalness, undercover, a bit of everything. So use the tools that you've got. You don't necessarily have to don a balaclava and go somewhere in the night. We've got a lot more tools and a lot more experience these days to do something. But believe that animals do have rights and that you want to fight for them.
But you can don a balaclava. Okay, I think we are fast running out of time, so I'm going to quickly move on to the Q&A. I think to get through as many as we can, I'll just get each of you to answer different questions, if that's all right. Starting maybe back to you, Angie. The question is, breaking the law for the first time is scary, and it tends to get easier once you know that it's possible, once you've done it. What advice would you give to someone thinking about breaking the law for the first time?
Just do it. It's not, yeah, that's all. You know, just be aware of the consequences and what might happen. And a lot of the times the worst isn't that bad. So yeah, it is scary, but just embrace that scary can be good too.
Brilliant. Mel, you three are hugely inspiring, which I strongly agree with, but who inspires you? It's a good one.
What now?
I'm going to answer for now or then, both, either.
Do you know, at the time, it was just purely animals. I was inspired by the suffering that animals were experiencing, and yet, like for rescue dogs, for example, when you knew they'd been experimented on, and yet, I mean, obviously they piss in fear. It takes a lot of work to actually bring them round to being able to trust humans again. But nevertheless, when you've seen something like that in an animal, and then they still learn to trust you, that kind of mentality in an animal, for me, which witnessing that over and over again was my inspiration. I didn't take inspiration from a human or any of my peers because I didn't know what my peers necessarily were doing in the first place. So for me, I've always been very much inspired by the animals, which is at the heart of an animal rights activist. That's what I'm guided by, compassion really, not a person.
Beautiful. Bev, have we lost something by losing autonomy in the movement?
Christ, I got a good one, didn't I? I think there's place for both. You know, the Animal Liberation Front was successful because it was autonomous, and it took a long time for the state to understand that. Individual cells didn't subscribe to a membership. They couldn't find a membership. So I think autonomy was really important. But I think there's also an element where we need to organise. Sometimes there needs to be a bit of an organising force. So if you take the Shack and the Hillgrove campaign, there was a leadership structure there, and there was a plan and a strategy. And I think that they for better or ill, worked. So in terms of autonomy, I think there's a place for autonomy. I think people should be able to just get ready and go out and see something and go and do it, you know, not wait for someone to tell them. But I think there's also a role for kind of national organisations and national campaigns as well.
Back to Angie, I think you talked about the VPSG a bit earlier. As a prisoner, how important was the prison support work of the ALFSG, the Animal Liberation Front Support Group, to you?
Yes, it was important because it meant you weren't forgotten and it really helped your time go quickly. The VPSG made sure we could use vegan toiletries, have soya milk in, things like that. But for us, it's sort of, you know, it's never been sort of just about diet. It's, you know, if there's no, you know, there's always potatoes. There's, you know, it's not that. But certainly the support, the prisoner support was really good, just by knowing that, you know, you weren't alone and you were supported. Plus, you were getting the news that other actions were going on without you, so that was really always really good. Yeah.
Do you think it helped reassure people taking action in the first place, knowing that there would be support once they were in prison?
I don't know if it helped. I don't think we even thought about it. It was just prison was a consequence of our actions, and that was it. We knew what we were letting ourselves in for. Whether I got support or not being inside, it didn't matter. And several activists didn't want to be on the supporters group list because they didn't want letters from people they didn't know, or didn't want to be seen like they were still involved in direct action. I'm not too sure. So it certainly, to me, whether I got support or not, it didn't matter. But it certainly helped, yeah.
Mel, one for you, I think. Talking of self-sufficiency and autonomy, do you think that with all the professional and funded organisations and roles in the movement nowadays, that it might be harder for people to find a path to activism because they feel swamped by non-profits? It's a big question, isn't it?
Say it again.
Do you think all the big organisations and funding in the movement at the moment is, I suppose, stopping people from getting involved in autonomous activity or just acting off their own?
No, I don't think so. Because, you know, people are they are their own person. They have their own minds. They might be influenced by joining a larger organisation because there's more organisation, because there's more visibility, and it could be easier. In a way, because someone else is making decisions or organising things, and then you come along to it. But I think essentially, most people are guided, I think, by a particular concern within animal exploitation, and will focus on a particular thing. And if they see gaps, then that is a point at which you can start thinking for yourself. What can slot into that gap? What might work? What can you try? So I think, you know, people will always have that independent thought about, oh, if only this could happen, but they're waiting for someone else to perhaps do that. And I think it's important for people to recognise that they can actually take decisions for themselves and be very effective in a small group of people as well. But I think we need, like Bev said, I think we need to be throwing everything at the animal exploitation industry. We need politicians on side as well. We need laws changing. We need, boots on the ground, sabbing. We need outreach. We need direct action. We need places like Camp Beagle. People that would just sit on the side of the road for 4.5 years and not move. Laws being changed as a result of that. I mean, that is an effective campaign. And all they're doing is sitting there. But again, they're thought outside of the box and were prepared to sacrifice their own personal time and comfort levels to make a point of sitting there. So I think, there's always things that we can do. whether it is on our own or whether it is part of national organisations. We have to know ourselves, know where our boundaries lie, know what we're prepared to do and what we're not prepared to do, and do it. So.
I'm just going to finish with a question, hopefully for all of you, which is, what would you like people to take away from this panel? Yes, please.
I would say, don't go and get nicked. The real success are the people that do stuff and aren't wheeled out as animal rights prisoners, okay? So go out and do things, but think smartly. It doesn't always have to be illegal. And also know your enemy and modify your activities to work around it.
Yeah, I agree. And also just don't give up, never give up. It can seem really overwhelming at times, especially with social media, when we're being inundated with images from all over the world, of horrendous kind of images, and it's very easy to be very dejected, to be very reactionary, and perhaps do things that haven't been well thought through as well. So I would say develop a form of resilience, really support each other, be very compassionate about yourself as well as an activist, but also keep your mind on animals, on the long term, and just, know what you want to be involved in and be involved in it. And make sure you have a balance in life, you look after yourself, and it breeds longevity. We are in it for the long haul, so whatever your choice of activism is, do it with good heart, with positivity, support each other, look after yourself, and just absolutely never give up. Just keep doing what you're all doing, because you're all amazing. You're amazing for being here, and you're amazing, for taking the animal rights as something that you want to be involved in a world where you could also be involved in so many other things. So whatever you're doing is amazing. Just keep doing it.
Yeah, exactly what they've just said. Do I need to say more? Just believe in yourself. What you do, anything is important. It doesn't necessarily, you don't have to all run into a laboratory and steal some beagles. That would be amazing if you did. But everything is important. Giving out leaflets are important. Bearing witness, going on demonstrations, writing letters, every little bit really does help. And it's, have faith in yourself. And we are on the right side of history. It is hard. I've been campaigning just over 46 years, and sometimes it's like, what the hell? When are we going to see something? But we have had so many changes in this country. So we must remember that. But anything you do is something, and keep going back to it. Use your strengths or find your strengths. It could just be talking to somebody. I've known some amazing activists that have become vegan and activists just because they were handed a leaflet. So everything is important. So, be proud of yourself, and, take breaks if you need to, but just always come back to it, if that's a few weeks, a few years, but, and look after each other as well. That's really important. Look after each other.
Thank you. I think we are finished. We're about to be dragged off the stage, but thank you so much, these three amazing people.